and doing this Imagine Compose session next week with Harold and Jackie was all lined up to do it with me, and then she's got a job teaching university part-time, so she emphasis on those who are teaching it, so she sort of can't agree to face it. And because the day was in October, I was like, oh, it's ages, and now it's here. It's next week. It's funny, isn't it? October seems the winter.
Yeah, it's nearly next year.
Yeah, it is. You've got so much to do, you know, just So Kirsty's doing it. Oh, great. I saw doing the list and thought, well, that's a lot. Actually, Kirsty's close to the most. Like, That's next week's. I've had about 3 weeks in our canal project and various workshops around that with the music on the barges. Yes. So that got that all out of the way. The family workshop where it's free beds, you've got 20 places, and you know, it's not a real bin, so you can and then 10 more people turn up at random intervals across the afternoon. and you realise, despite you saying it a number of times, they're still winging equipment through your workshop during the foyer. Yes. Thinking about things. So they were rehearsing in the Imogen foyer activity. They were rehearsing for the evening. Which I have to say was absolutely fantastic. The programming and BCMG director and Rebecca Saunders and some very different range. So there was some real positives going on.
Yeah, so whenever you're ready, really. Okay. I'm just going to say this, say who I am, and then quickly say who you are, all the career results, and then hand it over. How should I hand over?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Any way you like.
Any way I like.
Yeah.
Nice.
Who's going to start with me?
Okay. Good to know. All right, welcome to South Bank Centre and the Nordic Music Days. This 4-day music festival is one of the highlights of Nordic Matters, which is South Bank Centre's year-long program. That's a celebration of wide-ranging Nordic art and culture. And it features music, dance, theatre, visual arts participation, talks and debates, and gastronomy, which I would have loved to go to. Nordic Matters is the biggest Nordic program of arts and culture that the UK has ever seen, and it sits at the very heart of South Bank Centre's international strategy. It is designed to enable audiences to delve deep and experience the richness and diversity of Nordic culture, whilst creating new networks for collaboration between the UK and the Nordics. And it's also supported by the Nordic Council of Ministers. Now, you have no idea why I'm telling you all this, and you probably won't until the end of these 4 days. My name is George. I'll be presenting most of the things going on during the festival. But this is the first thing that's going on. So I'm not that important yet. But these three people are. We have a seminar now called Young People Composing and Contemporary Music. And we have Professor Martin Fautley, we have Judith Robinson, and we have Nancy Evans. And I actually memorized that. I did not have to look there to find that out. And they'll be talking about something that's really, really important to me, since I'm a musician who only plays new music. And you know that I'm sort of a vampire when it comes to getting new people to write music. I need that sweet new music coming from younger composers. And this is one of the ways that we can get younger composers working. This seminar will, at 2:30, there is a closed seminar. This is the open one, but you who were lucky enough to what's it called? Get tickets to the closed seminar 2:30. That will be in the Blue Room, a couple of flights down. And if you're desperate to be part of it, I'm sure you can apply to be a part of it now if after the seminar. That's basically it for me now. I'd like to hand over to Martin Fautley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really nice to be here. Yeah, we're talking about young people composing and contemporary music. It's great when you do what it says on the screen. I need to illuminate a little first. We are very much in this presentation focusing on children and young people composing. That's our key focus centrally that we're thinking about in what we're doing in this session. Why are we doing this? Because composing is a really important way of engaging with living composers and their music. So that's what we are going to do. That's how we are interpreting our brief. That's the point and the whole rationale of what we are going to be doing. So who are we and why are we here? Which is a good existential question for an afternoon to be thinking about. Who are we and why are we here? We each have backgrounds relevant in a variety of ways, and I think it's worthwhile just before we get too far to explain why we are here and what our backgrounds are and why they are relevant. Judith, would you like to kick off with that?
Okay, do I need to come stand here?
You can stand where you like.
Hello, so my name's Judith Robinson and I lead the education programme for Sound and Music. Sound and Music is the national organisation in England, also working in the UK sometimes, but mainly England, and we support the creation and the enjoyment of new music in all that forms. It could be sound art, it could be contemporary classical music, and we do that in lots of ways. We work with artists on their creative development, we do audience development work, and we do education. So I'm here today to talk about the education work.
So I'm Nancy Evans and I'm the Director of Learning for Birmingham Contemporary Music Group. Birmingham is a big city in the centre of the country, and the ensemble, I work with an ensemble, and I run their learning programme, which is again very much about young people creating, performing new music, and a whole wide range of projects to that end. So putting on concerts, commissioning, and actually getting young people to create their own music. That's kind of at the heart of it. And why we're all here today is that not only have we all been working in that area, but we've also been working collaboratively in this area too, through a range of projects. Sometimes all three of us together. You'll hear about the Listen, Imagine, Compose project, an action research project which brought teachers and composers and researchers together. Music Maze, a project aimed at 8 to 12-year-olds, where we were looking at how the use of repertoire, this was with Martin, the use of repertoire in stimulating children's own composition, and also a really important national initiative is the summer school for young people, young composers that Judith and Sound and Music run. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today draws on these sort of seminal projects, millions of other projects going on as well, but these are quite core seminal projects for us, and we'll be drawing a lot of our thinking and sharing with you today. Should I just carry on? So a very, right, here we go, a really short history of composing. Sorry, it's lots of words there. But basically, composing has been part of the UK curriculum since 1987, but actually creative music making has been there for much longer. So, you know, the Carl Orff kind of method had a lot of creativity and children creating their own music in it. And then we had Peter Maxwell Davies, so this is one of the first instances, of course Britain, Peter Maxwell Davies's first instances of composers working with young people, creating music for them, having them create their own music as well. And then there's I think a sort of real seminal moment in this country was the work which was done by the Schools Council Project Music in the secondary school curriculum, led by John Painter at York University, and his seminal work, Sound and Silence. And I think a lot of what happens in the UK curriculum these days, and the composing element of that, still draws on some of the thinking that was established at that point. And also I personally have drawn awful lot from the Canadian composer and educator Murray Schafer, and you can see there lots of other really important figures in this sort of this very short history of children composing. And also the work of the London Sinfonietta when Gillian Moore was their education officer, and how they were using repertoire as a stimulus for composing there. So that's a very, very short history of important people in the history of children composing. Right, so I'm going to hand it back over to Martin.
Okay, so why am I here? I'm Professor of Education at Birmingham City University. Nearly all of my research is in music education, much of it in creativity and assessment, hence I'm here. If I have a background in assessment, then I'm interested in formative assessment. So here's a piece of formative assessment in action. Can you raise your hand if you are not from an English background, please? Super. Right, there's a piece of formative assessment in action that I've now got a view as to where people are from. And I said English very specifically, so anybody from Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland need not shout at me, because in England, education is divided between the home countries differently. And we're in London, we're from Birmingham, Judith is from London, still in England. The English context is that music in schools is compulsory up to the age of 14. To be truthful, until recently, music was compulsory. Our government has enacted a number of changes, some of which have made music less compulsory in schools. Should you wish to talk over a coffee later, I can explain at great length why that is the case, but I won't do so now. In the UK, so as a whole, this is known as Key Stage 3, when they're aged from 11 to 14. And you know how it is with people, they lapse into jargon very easily. So if I start talking about Key Stage 3, I'm talking about kids aged from 11 to 14 years old. There are national curriculum orders, and each UK country has its own orders. We're in England, so we're concentrating on England. And it just needs to be borne in mind, I'm not using England in that bad English way to mean Britain. I'm using England to mean England because it's that specific. So what is it about the curriculum in England? What is there? This is the entire national curriculum for English children aged between 11 to 14. It is, according to my word counter on the computer, 197 words long. I haven't counted them individually, so I'll trust the computer. That's it. That's all of the curriculum for children aged 11 to 14. But notice that there are some things in there, and there's a number of words that are used. And so there's all sorts of things about the whole range of music, but notice composing is up in there, improvise and compose, developing ideas, a whole range of things. Composing is in the national curriculum. So this is just, I have just copied and pasted out of the official document. This is the whole thing. This is what curriculum music entails. But what does composing in schools and with young people actually mean? There's a researcher whose name is Margaret Bowden, and she has written this. If Mary Smith has an idea which she could not have had before, her idea is P-creative. Bowden uses that to mean psychological. It means for the person, no matter how many people have had the same idea. The historical sense applies to ideas that are fundamentally novel with respect to the whole of human history. If creativity is not singular or special, then we can say that P-creative utterances, Anna Craft calls this little c creativity, are creative utterances. And for us that's important because it means that composing music is an instance where this occurs. Let me give you an example. If you ever worked with kids and you give them a glockenspiel or a xylophone, one of the first things they do is run the beater up and down the notes from left to right and left to right. And then what they probably do is play every other note, and they go do 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 in thirds going up. They've never done that before. You, the session leader, have heard it millions of times, and you may even actually tell them to stop because you don't want to hear it again. But for that particular child, at that particular moment, This is P creativity. It's psychologically, it's personal to them. They've never done it before. Wow, there's a glockenspiel. I'm going to do this. Amazing. But it's not amazing, I'll go back a slide, for the whole of human history, because all of the rest of us have heard it. So that's important, because it doesn't mean that what we are looking for are suddenly young people being able to produce significant pieces of music based on that by themselves. So there's some real issues in terms of the way that that is being done. A lot of composing in education happens in groups. It's a practical activity. The piece is produced by the kids themselves for the instruments in that group, and it's subsequently performed on those instruments. We've practiced our entire presentation, but not the choreography.
Sorry.
And we just. Group, did you just say about
I've
group?
just said that.
You just said that. So that's one thing that's important to bear in mind. The second thing is that, you know, we're talking here about school and an informal activity that might happen as part of orchestral education program. But I think we also just have to remember about the creativity that's also happening in children's bedrooms, using technology away from formal education situations, and also how much creativity happens without anybody really noticing it. That sort of noodling around that children do on a keyboard, and someone tells them to stop messing about. They're sort of warming up and finding interesting patterns, and their instrument teacher says, "Oh, no, don't do that. It's gonna, it's not good for your instrument," or whatever. So there's all sorts of creativity that happens that we don't necessarily see or value. And another thing I think it's important to think about, because a lot of the composing that we do with young people is with instruments, and now there's so many tools for production on computers, etc. They're very slick tools, and how we have to think, how is that affecting how young people compose, and how might that influence how we work as well? We know from research and from anecdotal evidence that composing is the area of the curriculum that feels least accessible to classroom teachers. And one of the reasons for this is many classroom teachers have come to teaching as performers and not as composers. I don't know if that's experience that you have also. We'll talk about that in a minute. And why is it that composing is so challenging? And as Bolden says, what teacher composing actually looks like remains foggy for many educators. Just another quote for you to ponder upon, just let you read that. And in the seminar, the idea is that we're not just going to talk the whole time, but we'd like you to do some thinking also. So I'm just going to move on to some questions that we have, and it's an opportunity for us to learn from you too. And just to know what, maybe talk amongst yourselves a little bit, find a little group where you are, but what is the place of composing in your national context, composing with young people in your national context, and are there any particular challenges to that? I wonder if you could just make some little informal groups for a minute to talk about this, and then we can maybe share back our thinking, and then so if you could.
Hi. Yes. So,
Do my teacher bit, shut my
Shall I write so you can be ready for the...
Oh, so I don't need to write that. It's just like
That's you, I guess.
That's Judith. Which one?
So should I pick up just the three lengths of features?
Yeah, that's great.
We've got some more questions. Yeah, they are managing to talk to each other. Oh, yeah. Right, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt your conversations. So, it'd be really interesting listening to the sound of discussion filtering through. And I'm going to ask for volunteers just to say a few quick words about what they've been speaking about, and they are going to be quick, and I'm going to time you, because if you go on for more than a minute, I'm going to stop you. Okay, so if anybody would like to just say, yes, in our group we were talking about, now's your chance to volunteer. Hello.
Hands up.
Good man.
We were talking about this guy's teacher for kids between 11 to 16 years old, about composing and getting them into music. And my question to him was, is there like an education kind of titles to be writing about, because the kids are 11 to 16, so is there an education process they can write that as well, not just, you know, I'm in the club with my girlfriend, it's going real well, or something like that. Something that has a bit of meaning and that can nurture the growth of children, basically.
Okay, that was good, and you managed to keep it to just over 30 seconds. Very impressive. Other people? Yeah, hello.
Hello, we are from Denmark and Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
We were just talking about in both of our countries there's really not a lot of composing in the schools, especially if you talk about the public schools. In the private music schools maybe, and still not a lot of stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's no place
Okay.
in my national context.
Right. Anyone else? We've had lots of... Anybody here? Feel free not to. I don't wish to impose compulsory enjoyment if you don't wish to.
In at the school where I went to, we had to do quite a bit of composing. There were always tasks and things that they always made you like invent something or create something new. I think common in English schools.
It's in the national curriculum, so theoretically it should be common in English schools. Somebody at the back was waving, sorry.
We were just talking, kind of just talking about our work that we were doing, but one issue that you raised was how children then learn to maintain what they've composed and how you write it down, whether that's a big issue or whether it's something that doesn't need to be composed.
Yeah, and I'm going to just say, let's just park that for a moment and we'll return to it. Some really interesting responses, and the whole range of views and the national context are so very different. Just to lead us into some more thinking, Judith is going to talk to us a little bit about a project we've been involved in called Listen, Imagine, Compose.
Yeah. So, yes, although we're three separate organisations, we've been working together since 2010, I think. And we have been working on a long-term partnership. It's a research and development project, and we've been investigating how composing is taught and learned in secondary schools. And we've been pulling together teachers and their pupils, I should add, teachers and their pupils and composers and academics and other arts organisations. It's been a really valuable process to bring together those different expertises. I think it's very easy to sort of, for teachers in this country, when they're asked, maybe when they're asked to teach composing, they say, well, I can't compose, I'm a performer, I don't know. But they're still creative people and they're still experts in teaching and pedagogy. So to bring together those skills, to bring something that's bigger than the sum of that whole, has been really interesting. We've done lots of different kinds of activity. We've done research, often action research, so delivery through asking research questions and doing delivery in a school context, and then learning from that process and going round cycles of investigation. We hold an annual symposium for our network so that our network can grow and we can share our learning. We have resources. For example, we have lesson plans and ideas for creative activities in the classroom. We have a dedicated website for those, and we run CPD, so teachers who are particularly interested in developing their practice can do a year-long course, and they work towards a master's degree, which is accredited by Martin's University. So it's quite a comprehensive programme of work that we've drawn together. Here are some of the findings from our research and our investigations. That learning and doing are different, and that, I think, for us in England at the moment, there's a big political emphasis on learning knowledge. The government talks about a knowledge-based education, so you have to know facts. Well, what about the knowing how to do, and what about the learning of things that you learn because you are doing it? So composing is one of those areas where learning and doing are complementary and both important. Good learning is helped by good questioning, and I'm sure if you're an educator, I'm sure that's the same in any country, and how you as a music educator working with young people to be creative, how you question them and how you help them develop their own thinking to be creative is part of the art of being a good teacher. And the language that you use, again, is important. And this leads, the next point leads on really. Composing intentions, they're important for young people. Music's a very personal experience, so what you want, what is it that you want your music to say, and how do you want to communicate that, and what are the musical tools you're going to use? They're very important, and it leads into all sorts of questions about ownership and style and genre as well. And finally, and this final point, it's a reflection partly on an observation maybe of some composers who work in educational contexts, but composers and teachers should not compose on but with pupils. So again, it's about respecting young people's intentions and musical wishes and their culture, which may be different to ours. And when we're starting to talk about contemporary music and audiences and the experience of contemporary music, that's an important thing to bear in mind. A couple more things from the research we've done. Composing is an activity. It's something that you do and that you learn through doing. It's a process. There is a creative process of how do you begin, how do you develop, how do you end. It's a process that, a bit like action research, it goes round in a spiral as you improve and review your work and change it and everything. And this links back to the technology question you had earlier, Nancy, but in some forms of more popular culture, the creative process can be invisible. So it looks like a song is produced, which makes beginning composers, young people, makes the process difficult for them, because if they don't understand that you start with a small idea and you might reject it or you might improve it and change it, if you don't understand that process, it's very easy to become dispirited and to not like, to just say, oh, I don't like it, I'm no good. And that's something that we need to understand in order to help people. And first, it's going to play. Stop.
We were talking about technology there. So.
Talking about technology. So we wanted to play you a short piece of music. It came out of one of the action research projects we did. we had a composer called David Horn, who he's one of our more mature composers in the country. He's somebody he's had a Proms commission, so sort of quite well known in the country as a composer. But he's also very committed to working with young people. He worked with a teacher and actually with a professional musician. This is the professional musician Kyle, who plays at BCMG. And they worked together, they worked with the pupils, and each pupil wrote a piece for saxophone. And I think it was a school in Birmingham. It wasn't a specialist music school. The children were maybe 15.
It's a girls' school, wasn't it, I think? Was it?
Yeah, it's a
it was
regular girls' school.
Okay.
And quite mixed in terms of diversity.
Yes. So socio-economically and culturally quite a diverse school.
And how old?
They were about 15. So I think they'd opted to do music.
Yes,
Yeah.
they were in GCSE.
But because they were shown the instrument and what the instrument can do by one of the country's best exponents of the saxophone, then this is what they did.
So can I do the tape?
I can do that.
I'm hoping that the score, I might have, fingers crossed that score and video work at the same time.
And then I'll hand it to you later.
Oh, we didn't. Sorry. You can have the video or you can have the score. Go for the video. That's much more exciting. In an earlier version of PowerPoint, you could have video and score, so I shouldn't have updated. That's all my fault. So this is a performer. The score you can see in the bottom right-hand corner. They used to play under the video. Leads us to some questions about what was going on and what is going on. One of the things that those of us who work in this area have spent a long time wondering about is what we actually called it. And so one of the things that we've discussed a lot is what do we mean by the sort of music that we're talking about. For the moment, we're calling it contemporary classical music. There's all sorts of other descriptions. What's its place in the Key Stage 3 curriculum and beyond? The answer is often it can be very slight. When we see it in England, it's often based on what a lot of commentators refer to as tuneful minimalism. In other words, pieces by Steve Reich or Philip Glass. So questions are what sorts of music will children and young people have encountered as performers and in the classroom? And this leads to a question about what the composers need to think about when creating new music for young performers?
Is that me?
I think, are you asking? I'm happy to ask questions. I thought it was you.
Yeah, it's probably as me.
Yeah, I'm just sort of following on from that. What Martin was saying about young people encountering contemporary music. I think most young people will only really encounter the contemporary music maybe that we're talking about and listening to at this festival when they get to conservatoire. And even at that point, some of it will be very challenging to play. So as in my role, one of the things that I've been very keen on is to commission new music from composers we would commission to write also for BCMG. But in the process of doing that, I found that is not always not always simple. You know, how do composers simplify their voices in a way that children can achieve those pieces that they write. And my experience is that when I've ever commissioned a composer, it's always been too complex for the children. And yet I still really believe that there is a way of composing music for young people that keeps that voice of the composer, but it also takes them into a different kind of sound world. And I think it's really important to reflect on that. And I've had various experiments with different people in that, and I don't necessarily think I've cracked it yet. So yes, achievable contemporary music, so they're getting really positive experiences of it early on in their career, and I think that's one thing that commissioners and arts organisations can really be doing. Which leads us on to these questions, which again I'd like you to talk about in your groups. What is the best way to facilitate children and young people meeting new music? And how can we make music by living composers relevant? So if we could maybe just form our little groups again and have a little chat around those questions, and then I'll have a chance to feedback. I quite like being in charge. I quite like if there's time to just see if they've got any experiences of presenting you to young people.
There we go.
Where you can see IOD or a cheerleader, and you have to be always the same. It's the same at the same time. I really believe I thought I learned some first small technical style. There's 15 and they would go the initial enthusiasm. If certain milestones were made easy for me, then I would reach it rather than not. That's where education comes
own experience.
Right, focus your attention again at the front, if you don't mind, please. Same principle as before. You have no longer than a minute should you wish to speak, but speaking is entirely voluntary. Any just a minute volunteers for speaking? Hello.
Yeah, hello. I'm a Danish Swedish group here. We talked about composers composing for young people. It's sometimes about understanding that the composers is composing their own music, their own voice, but consider young people as kind of new instrumentation, new instrument, and then be quite keep on the ideas they are working with, but realize the difficult task to make the music sound like their own music, but with another instrument like this, which is like young people playing it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of meeting the young people in the eye level, and don't try to make the musical ideas put them on their head, but lift them up with the idea, so the young people take them into and make them touch the idea.
I think that's a really important little sort of debate in there, because there's everything from the children just making all their own music to a composer arriving with a fully finished score, and there's a whole kind of range of other options within there, and that sort of where the child still has some kind of sense of ownership of that piece and that process is really interesting, I think.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to be stopping you, but obviously we're on a very tight.
And the question was, when you commission the music, do the composer get to meet the band or the orchestra?
Yeah, in every occasion.
And for how long?
Yeah, I think in different projects we've had different amounts of time.
Okay.
And then just
so
about.
They knew like the level and so.
They knew. They certainly.
What they were writing for.
They certainly at least met them once or twice.
Right.
And I'm just about to start 2 new projects. One a song cycle, children participating, another with our apprentice composer in residence writing an ensemble piece for a group of young musicians. So again, how to do that and how to do it meaningfully, but preserving the composer voice, but making the children feel part of that is really important. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
I was about to think,
Yeah,
perhaps ought to
that's
sign you
more
as well.
Yeah, I think we should, yes.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Tina. I come from the Danish Composers Society. We organize composition workshops in schools, and we have had some good feedback from composers going out composing with the children and then afterward presenting some of their own music, where when the children have composed themselves and have done music, that they're actually quite open to whatever music they're presented to from the composer. So that was just things we talked about as an answer to this question.
Yeah.
How can you facilitate music?
Yeah,
Good stuff.
I think, completely agree with you. That's transformed.
Yeah, we did a similar thing here with our audio program, actually, with some assignments and placements with a young composer going into a school and working with very young children around sort of soundscapes and animals and emotions, and then the composer took the piece from them and performed together. The children performed with the composers for a job. It was beautiful. They had a real connectivity with it because they'd grown at the same time and they'd understood the composer's job.
I think it's really interesting the way that we're really thinking about these best ways of facilitating. So I think this is so important that we do this. And I just need to move on, bearing in mind time. I can again really only talk about England, but there is a climate that we have, and the phrase is a phrase of Arnold's, the best that has been thought and said, as being the driving force behind English education, which has tones of historicity behind it. It's about historical, the best that has been, as opposed to is. And so a question for the group, or perhaps maybe for for the whole sort of people working in this area is how do we incorporate new music into that? Which then leads to another aspect which has become important in the English notion, which is the idea of there being a canon of classical music. And this, Lydia Gurr talks about the Imaginary Museum. How do we stop it just becoming a museum of dead composers? So, you know, as one kid in a school said, does you have to be dead to be a composer? So that's that sort of phrases. What are the attitudes to composing in the current political climate? Now that everything is political, and the ways, particularly in education, that it's thought about. A very salutary survey has come out from an American research group called the Pew Research Center. I'm terribly sorry about the relative underrepresentation of Nordic countries in some of the survey components, but I'm also terribly sorry about the position of the UK in the way in which the question put to respondents. You'll have to look the methodology up yourself, but this is asking people basically to choose on scales. In England, in UK, so not just in England, to be creative and think independently has come out at the bottom of all of the respondents they were asked, and I feel very sad to report that the UK values creativity and independent thinking less than Kenya and just about everywhere else. Conversely, it values basic academic skills and the encouragement of discipline. If this is the window in which new music is trying to position itself, this is all part of a political with a small c political climate. It matters to all of us in the ways in which we're working.
Interesting. So I guess you're a mixture of composers, teachers, people working contemporary music. Is that right? Yeah. So it'd just be interesting for you to have a discussion. In your own organisations, what are you doing about young people composing contemporary music? What's going in your organisations? I'd be really interested to hear back. Are any of you kind of involved in projects where you use repertoire as the stimulus for children's own composing? And what's the purpose of those? What is the purpose of those projects? What are you trying to do there? And are there any challenges that you've had around presenting contemporary music to young people, maybe in more of a concert situation? So maybe in your groups you could pick which questions speak to you, and then we can share back some of our thoughts.
That's the last slide. One more question.
I don't know how to translate. Are they rhetorical ones to read? So I think it's probably and there's nothing. Bell's not going to go. It's not very good.
People have some pressing questions. Yeah. So I'll ask
It's good to
die waren in orde og hele nogle men altså et projekt.
Okay, sorry, I kept interrupting.
That's the thing. So I'll do the minute time if you want. It's really useful, otherwise you get people if you don't tell them that you've got a minute, it's 5 minutes later, and it's such a
Okay. So just if we can share back some of our thoughts. Sorry, time's moving on. Martin's still in charge of timing. So any thoughts that have come out of your discussions? Yes.
Yes. Well, some of us have been in a project like it's number 2 here, where children write their own music, but based on existing music.
Yes.
Like they hear a piece by Stockhausen, and then they make their own version. And they do make a new composition, but they have a starting point. The good thing about this is that we have something to actually listen to begin with, and there's a point of reference, and there's a place to start, and there's somewhere to go from there.
Yeah.
So it's a nice little frame to put something into when you have 4 days to do something, and we need to make a concert at the end. So
it gives a sort of frame to it. And actually that's what that's the second session this afternoon. We'll be absolutely looking at that, about the use of repertoire and what that means for young people's composing. So yes, we'll talk more about that later. Any other thoughts?
We are from Finnish Composers Society, and we have just started a new project in Finland where 9 composers are now all around the country, going to music institutes and teaching there, and together with music theory teacher, they help children to compose, and also the musicians, like cello teachers.
So working in music schools, combining what they do with music theory lessons, and
how to use composition in music theory.
Yeah, so getting away from just kind of more maybe not less exciting music theory, but making it more interesting through doing composing as well.
And we also think that this is a very good way of making kids and young students familiar with their contemporary music, because we put them to create them by themselves.
Yes.
So they are not only watching the process; they are in the very middle of the process, doing new pieces, and then they get performed as well.
Yeah, and I think the involvement of the instrumental teachers is really important there,
of course.
and that connection. And you might be interested to look on our website a project called Imagine Compose, where we worked with beginner instrumentalists around involving composing right from the beginning of learning to play an instrument. So yeah, we'll share all these at the end, but there's various reports that on all of our different sites that might be interesting for you to look at.
Yeah. We talked about, we are arts organisation before this group, then we talked about the aspect of role models, and we work with that and try to find out how can we work with this in different ways, because in Denmark at least, composers are quite invisible in society. So this thing about actually making them more visible, for example, by sending them out in schools, making projects, working with children, either by presenting music or doing music, and actually showing what is a composer today and how can you work as a composer, how can you create music as a professional.
And is that something quite new in Denmark, or has it been going on for some time?
It's been going on for years, but very project-based, and still, since it's not really part of a school infrastructure, but really based on organisation like ours, actually taking the initiative, it's still quite invisible and then taking place in quite closed contexts.
Yes.
So really trying to work with the question of role models in different ways and making them more visible, that's one of our most important tasks.
And I think that's the thing that Judith and I talk about a lot also, is about where are the platforms for young people's music as well. Not not just those projects in schools, but where do we actually hear music created by young people? I think Music for Youth in this country is doing a good job there. They've got a new music stage as part of their national festival where it really features music by young people, and encouraging more teachers to actually play music by their students as well, that sort of thing. Any other thoughts before we move at the back? Yeah,
I work with students, we work for a charity with students who've been excluded from schools. So we have 45 minutes a week for music.
Nothing.
So we just do very simple, we just start trying very simple projects where, just with loop pedals, so we get students to work on, so we take a piece of music, they hear a piece of music and it just sounds, I mean, they also have special education needs as well, so that it is very difficult. But they hear a piece of music and they don't understand. There's so many parts to it, so we break it down. So we take a piece they like, we break it down, and then we play it one note at a time, one beat at a time, and then you build up a loop, say something, 4-bar loop or something, and by the end of it they can see that it's absolutely achievable, and then they can create like that as well. It's just very short loops.
Yeah, so breaking it down into constituent parts and then helping them build it back.
And encouraging them that the best things they do are the mistakes.
Yeah, great, thank you. I think we probably have to move on at this point. So next, where are we? Oh yes, and just thought it'd be. Oops, that's not the right way, is it? That's the wrong way.
It's that computer.
That's the one. There we go. So at BCMG we've been trying all sorts of experiments in how, as well as projects composing with young people, we've tried various experiments of how to present new music to young people. And so that this is some of the learning that we've had over the many years of doing that. We've really tried to shy away from the kind of traditional model of family and schools concerts where just to be, not characterise them. It's all around some kind of theme, go around the world, or water, or dances of the world, this kind of thing. So kind of themes that, actually programmatically pieces don't necessarily go together. It's the extra musical theme that's holding things together. So we've tried to go away from that. And of course we know that the instances of family concerts actually containing pieces of contemporary music are very, very rare. What we've learned is to maybe program lots of shorter pieces, but making sure they're very contrasting with each other, or program larger works which have intrinsic contrasts built in them. Recently, we did, I think our last family concert was around Burt Whistle's Secret Theatre, and we took that all apart and put it back together with them. So we don't shy away from presenting the music that we present on our main stage. We've been very careful about having meaningful pre-concert activity. It's not just make an animal mask. It's actually, this is, I remember some examples, Boulez using the codes and, just my mind's gone blank at the piece, using the Saka chord. What's the piece? You all know the piece maybe I'm talking about. Boulez. It's going to come back to me in a minute. But anyway, playing around with chords and really meaningfully engaging with the musical ideas. And we've also experimented with lots of different kinds of media, with having film, having animation, having elements of theatre, but being very, very careful that doesn't take over the music. It still needs to be music that's central. But what can we bring from other media that just illuminates that music for children, or maybe just holds their attention through the points where it might be uncomfortable and difficult for them? Really important, a lot of traditional schools and family concerts have big celebrities presenting. Actually having people who know about the music presenting, I think, is a really important factor too. And thinking really carefully about the audience interaction, that it isn't just shaking the shaky you've made outside along, or clapping, but that the activities are really meaningful to the music that the children are listening to. And you can probably find quite a few examples of that on the BCMG website. Finally, I'm going to hand over to Judith.
Thank you. So, I think we've nearly run out of time. So before we finish, I wondered if there were some big questions that we wanted to we have some questions here that we want you really to think about as you go, especially as you go about the Nordic Music Days Festival, around who is best to encourage young people in their composing. We've said schools here, but I think that it goes wider than that. It's in schools, it's in the community, it's about supporting young people in their creativity in their bedrooms, when they should be practicing their scales and they're being creative instead. Who are best placed? Is it the teachers? Is it composers? Is it both together? What are the conditions under which we can bring together these people who have different expertises in order to lay the foundations for our cultural life? That's a massive question and we can't answer it now, but I don't know if anybody has any comments that they would like to add as we finish the session. Or have I just, yes?
About that question?
Yes?
Yeah. I think for composers there are a wide area of possibilities to interact with schools.
Yes.
I think it's important for schools to have a person with high integrity
yes.
As a composer, but of course the composers are often they don't know much about the pedagogical aspects.
Exactly, so it's
so
about...
there has to be some kind of...
a dialogue.
Yeah, either that the composer are educated in using these matters in schools and in these contexts.
Yes.
That's an issue that can be discussed.
Absolutely.
And then I think it's also important for the teachers to be in their education, so that it can be some need.
Exactly.
In the middle.
Yeah.
So that both parties need some education, I think.
Yes.
So that's my. Then they could gather that. So.
Thank you. Any more thoughts?
Might be needed as well education for composers, writing for children and for amateurs, have the music more normal part.
I agree. Yes, thank you. Any other thoughts? Yes.
I'm from a publishing house in Denmark called Edition S, and we just had a project where we asked composers to write music for the school children, for the music schools in Denmark, which is a very interesting subject, and it has been actually quite difficult task to explain to the composers what the school pupils, what the level is, but we're working on it.
Did you have a good response?
Yes.
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 Great. Good. Anything else? Right. Well, thank you very much. We've really enjoyed meeting you, and we hope that the session has been useful, and enjoy the rest of the festival. Thank you.
Thank you.
Job done. Yeah, look up now.